Many years ago at a youth camp, a bunch of us young'uns went out on our canoes onto the dam. Well, when we started out, the weather was perfect, one of those perfect summer's days. It was sunny and near calm water. However, the warm summer's days soon changed and the dark clouds started forming and the wind began chopping the water. Well, being a little cautious, we decided to start making our way back. However, we were too late. A massive storm arrived. It came roaring across the lake. In fact, there were whirlwinds ripping at the trees on the sides. Thankfully, we had just made it to the edge, and we sat huddled beneath our canoe as the rain and the wind lashed furiously at us and everything else in its path. We were afraid, and we were on the land. The lake had been turned into this crazy, frenzied, churning mass of water. We were so thankful we had reached the edge. What would have happened if we had been caught on the lake in the midst of that storm? There are many times in life when we are caught in that storm. Everything seems to be going right. Life's water is calm and the sun is shining warmly down on us. And then often, without warning, a storm arrives. And despite our best efforts to avoid it, we suddenly find ourselves afraid, despairing, as the waves and winds of life threaten to overcome us. There's a Bible story where after Jesus had been teaching the people, he stayed to dismiss them and he sent his disciples away across the lake ahead of him. Immediately, Jesus made the disciples get into a boat and go on ahead of him to the other side while he dismissed the crowd. After he had dismissed them, he went up on a mountain by himself to pray. Later that night, he was there alone. And then we read how a huge storm suddenly appears and smashes across the usually calm Sea of Galilee. And the boat was already a considerable distance from the land, buffeted by the waves because the wind was against it. Jesus' disciples find themselves in a terrible struggle for their life, a struggle against the storm that lasts all night. It's dark, it's cold, and the waves threaten to overwhelm them. We may find ourselves here too, the darkest time in our life, when life's storms seem certain to overwhelm us. We despair, we cry to God for help, yet the waves and the wind continue to rage. The disciples battle the storm all night, endless. And then we read, shortly before dawn, Jesus went out to them, walking on the lake. Now, this is hardly going to be a great thing to see. Think about it. A crazy storm, you're terrified for your life, and then you see someone walking on the raging water. And so their fear is absolutely compounded. When the disciples saw Jesus walking on the lake, they were terrified. "It's a ghost," they said, and cried out in fear. Just when we thought our troubles couldn't get any worse, somehow they do. The news we receive, the things happening around us, the storm suddenly seems to intensify. But in this moment arises the need for one thing. But Jesus immediately said to them, "Take courage, it is I. Don't be afraid." This is when we need courage. Courage is something we often don't think about. We associate this with heroes slaying the dragons, facing down the huge enemy. It's not something we often think that we need. Yet as we face our worst dragon, as we face our worst storm, it's here that every one of us needs courage. Courage to look up and step out. Recently, I witnessed the ultimate act of courage. My dad, gasping for breath in hospital, telling the doctors to give the ventilator to others when they had given it to him, as he knew there wasn't enough for everyone. And as I marveled at his courage, I knew I stood by a true hero. And for me, I knew I would need courage, a courage found only in God's strength, to step forward and face the storm that raced towards us. And so Peter, one of the disciples sitting in the boat, fearful, does the most crazy thing possible. "Lord, if it's you," Peter replied, "tell me to come to you on the water." "Come," Jesus said. And then Peter got down out of the boat, walked on the water, and came toward Jesus. Peter steps into a sea that is so wild it threatens to overwhelm their boat. He steps out and onto the water. That's courage. Incredible courage. However, unlike the fairy tale stories where the hero vanquishes the dragon and the courageous knight overcomes, this is a real story. This is our story. But when Peter saw the wind, he was afraid, and beginning to sink, cried out, "Lord, save me!" It takes incredible courage to step into the storm, to step onto the raging water. And so we may call on God in our fear and despair and step forward, yet we're human. We look around the storm and the waves and we feel overwhelmed. The waves are so big, the storm is so huge. We're trying to be brave, but we are not made to be heroes, and we despair. And in this moment, there is only one thing we can cry: "Lord, save me." And immediately Jesus reached out his hand and caught him. "You of little faith," he said, "why did you doubt?" And in the depths of despair, Jesus grabs Peter, and then a miracle. And when they climbed into the boat, the wind died down. Calm. The storm ended. Maybe the storm still raged on the lake, but for these men the storm was over. However, it took an incredible act of courage from an imperfect, doubting man to bring about this peace in the raging storm. For us, when we find ourselves in our storm, maybe we have the courage to step out, knowing we lack the faith, but knowing that God will grab us, that He will save us, that He will give us peace in the midst of our storm. Courage is faith with legs. Step out, walk, and see the miracle as He grabs us and calms our fears. My prayer as I witnessed my dad's ultimate courage was to have his courage, to step into the storm that ravaged our family and look for Jesus to save me. And I stepped out of the boat and I sank, but He reached out His hand and He saved me.